Welcome, everyone. This is What's Happening, a program of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa. I'm really glad that you have joined us today. I'm Connie Ryan, and I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa. And What's Happening is really just a weekly conversation with leaders from across the state on a variety of topics. And so glad that you have decided to be with us. And if you have comments or questions, you can post those in the comment section of Facebook or YouTube. We're going to talk about banning and challenging books today. And we know this is not a new thing. This is something that has happened many, many times over the decades and centuries, really, in our nation. And to folks who just have an issue with particular types of books or genres of books. In today's world, it is mostly parents and community members who are challenging and asking for books to be banned in public schools that have to do with issues of race or racism or LGBTQ issues, or books around those kind of topics. And so we're going to just really dig into that and what's really happening. And I'm very pleased to have Amanda Vasquez, who is the chair of the Iowa Library Association Intellectual Freedom Committee. And welcome, Amanda. Thanks for being part of the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we were chatting before we came on, and you have been in this position for just 5 months as the chair. So what a year to take this on.
Yeah, it certainly has been a year. It started a little quietly. We had a few things come up over the summer, but they kind of came pretty quickly. Once we got into October and November, we had a number of challenges come up.
Yeah. So tell folks just a little bit about yourself, whatever you want to share, and the Iowa Library Association and the Intellectual Freedom Committee.
Yeah. So I'm, as Connie said, Amanda Vasquez. I'm the director of the Dubuque County Library District in Dubuque County, Iowa, and I have been a member of the Intellectual Freedom Committee for a couple of years, I believe since 2019, but just took over as chair earlier this year. The Intellectual Freedom Committee is a part of the Iowa Library Association that supports all librarians. You don't have to be a member of the association to receive assistance from the Intellectual Freedom Committee. So we try to do some education. We will occasionally publish position statements. We have resources available on our website, and we do challenge support. So this might be for a school or a library that has received like an official challenge, or they maybe just kind of see one coming or see some conflict in their community and want to get out ahead of it. And we help in several different ways. So we can be listening ears and help talk through things, and kind of informal therapists sometimes when you get out of charged meetings. We help with research a lot too, and sometimes even go and speak at meetings on behalf of those librarians as kind of someone else in the profession coming to give an outside opinion or perspective.
Yeah, sometimes that outside perspective is listened to a little bit more closely than even those who are closer to it. Mm-hmm. And so we know that, I said earlier, we know that banning books and challenging books is nothing new. We have seen that in communities across the nation historically for a lot of reasons. And talk just a little bit, and we won't spend a whole lot of time on history, but talk just a little bit about what you know of reasons and kind of the background on banning and challenging books.
Yeah. So I am not the most well-versed in the history of book challenges and book bannings, so I actually did a little reading on it this morning. And I was interested, but not surprised, by the assertion that I saw in one article that Uncle Tom's Cabin is one of the first books that had kind of a nationwide effort to censor it. And often challenges arise, especially repeated challenges arise, when I would say people's comfort is being challenged a bit. So the ideas that they hold dear or believe very strongly can be challenged by materials. And so as Connie mentioned earlier, right now we're seeing a lot of challenges to books with LGBTQ characters and content and stories to stories about racism, anti-racism, the Black experience. But we're also seeing some challenges to classics that people continue to find uncomfortable to read or to have discussions about. Some of the reasons that books have been challenged are profanity or language that people find offensive, sexual references or sexual misconduct, or even just sexual contact between characters, for the use of stereotypes. I'm trying to think of what some of the other more popular ones. Historically, the use of magic. The Harry Potter books were subject to a lot of complaints for that reason. But yeah, like I said, it really comes down to, in my opinion, people feeling that their beliefs are being challenged, and that often their students or youth are able to access information that they don't feel is representative of their own beliefs.
And so where are a lot of these challenges, and maybe we should differentiate also between the word challenge and ban, because a lot of people use the term ban, but so can you kind of walk through that with us and differentiate that for us?
Definitely. So we kind of talk about this in sort of three levels, and they are in decreasing frequency. So first off, we talk about complaints. So a parent or a patron or a library user might come in and have some sort of negative comment about a material that's on the shelf, or that their student had access to, or they picked up a book, found it offensive to themselves personally, make a comment to a librarian or library staff member. And those complaints are pretty common. Not every book is for every person, and sometimes they just want to let you know that there were some words in there you might not have known about, or it just wasn't right for them, and that's fine. Once we get to the level of a challenge, that's when things get a little more official. So libraries should all have collection development policies, and those guide how materials are acquired for, added to collections, and also withdrawn from collections, because libraries are not warehouses. We don't buy things and then hoard them and keep them forever. Libraries are meant to be used, and so therefore popular and well-used materials stay, and things people have outgrown or is no longer accurate, those are withdrawn. And those types of decisions and how staff make those decisions are laid out in policy. And part of that policy should also include a way for community members to request the reconsideration of a material or challenge the material. And those decisions are usually handled by higher level library staff. So whether that be the library director or a committee of employees, or a library board or board of education eventually at some point. So a challenge is when that formal process happens, and often it means a committee or an individual reads the entire work, listens to or reads the complaint, the official complaint from the patron, and then makes a decision about whether to retain that material, whether to retain it and maybe move it to a more appropriate section of the library, or to withdraw the material. And that is when you get to a ban. So if the material is actually removed from the collection and made unavailable to that population, that is when you get to the point of a ban. Often, like I said, libraries receive complaints, not infrequently. Often people just want to feel heard and that their positions and their opinions are being respected, and it doesn't rise to an actual challenge. And when it does rise to a challenge, often those materials are retained. So bans are uncommon, but they're not unheard of.
So we're seeing challenges and complaints across the state and in school districts across the state. As a librarian, do you find it troubling, the type of challenges and the number of challenges that we're seeing? And there's definitely a thread through some of those. And do you find that troubling as a professional librarian?
On the one hand, yes, and on the other hand, no. So if it weren't okay for people to challenge the inclusion of materials in their libraries, we wouldn't have a policy laid out for how to do that. And we, as librarians, information professionals, really believe everyone should have access to whatever information that it is that they want. But that means that there will be things that people don't want in their library that are still in their library. So they're a way to communicate our professional beliefs and professional ethics with members of the community, which is why often we try to reach people at the complaint stage and listen to them and explain. And a lot of people are satisfied at the end of those conversations. So on the one hand, I like having people who are involved in their library, who are users of their library, and who have opinions about what should be in their library. But yeah, I'm definitely concerned about and definitely have opinions about kind of the through line of the types of challenges that are coming up. And also kind of while it might not be officially a coordinated effort, I believe that there's definitely a lot of communication happening, especially on social media, where you might see a news story about something being challenged and think, oh my goodness, that couldn't be in my library. And then you go and you find it and, get upset about it. So while I wish everyone just inherently magically understood everyone's First Amendment rights to engage with whatever it is that they want, and could also understand how that should be extended to everyone's interests, and we should just leave everyone alone to read all of their own materials, that's just not the way that it is. And further education, further explanation is often required.
So you mentioned to me earlier before we came on that you were part of the library in Orange City when there were challenges a few years ago. And I want to talk a little bit about that experience and kind of what that challenge was and how you handled that as part of the library.
Yeah, definitely. So I was the director at the Orange City Public Library for a couple of years. That is my hometown library. That's where I grew up. I volunteered there as a middle schooler and got my first job there, I think just before I graduated from college. So I spent nearly 10 years working at that library, but only a couple of years as director. And this all arose out of a community group's decision to hold a Pride celebration in Orange City. And Orange City is home to, it's a very Protestant Dutch conservative town. It's home to Northwestern College, which is one of the schools affiliated with the Reformed Church in America. And yeah, some of my honestly friends decided to hold a Pride celebration in October. And there were some requests that the library acquire some additional materials that had LGBTQ stories, LGBTQ history, which I purchased because purchase suggestions and requests from patrons are a really great way to make sure that your collection is reflective of everyone's interests. I had some staff who were nervous about that, and when those books came in, there was a request from some staff that instead of displaying them with all of the other new books that came in and treating them just like any other book, that instead we automatically put those on the shelves in an effort to hide them. And I said, no, we were not going to do that. We're not going to start hiding materials and treating things differently. So there were a handful of material challenges, and not all just about LGBTQ materials. There was one about a superhero. Sorry, there's not a good way for me to mute my phone in my office.
Don't worry about it.
So we had a handful of book challenges to Morris Micklewhite and the Tangerine Dress, Two Boys Kissing, and at one point, someone who doesn't actually live in Orange City, but who lives in kind of the surrounding area, came in and checked out a few books. And the day of the family drag show for the Pride celebration, set up a burn barrel with the event center in the background and went on Facebook Live and talked about how much they disliked these books and burned them on video. That person was, I believe, convicted of a 5th-degree misdemeanor later, but we had a huge swell of donations come in, lots of support from all different sides and all over the world, actually. We had several international comments, but I would say, it kind of has a happy ending. We got a lot of donations, and now I'm on IFC and doing a lot of intellectual freedom work. But it was very distressing while it was going on. It was very stressful and really difficult, and I was making hard decisions. And one thing I wish I had heard maybe before, and I don't know that it would have changed how I did anything, but one thing I wish I would have heard before all of this happened was it's okay to make decisions to protect your job and to protect your library. Because at one point there was a comment from someone in the city about, well, what if the library just loses all of its funding? If you can't rein Amanda in or, change the way this is going. So luckily I had a library board who followed their policies. And even though I think many of them disagree with the content of the books that were on our shelves, they upheld the policy, which was that these materials were acquired according to our policy and our collection development procedures, that they did not contain anything illegal or that fell outside of our collection scope, and therefore they were retained. We did try some other things, like there were requests to have these books labeled, under the guise of, well, if someone wants these kinds of books, we should make them easy to find so they can find them on the shelves. But really it's putting a rainbow sticker on something and moving them to a tough topics area of the library is not ideal. There's no reason why they shouldn't be a part of the library collection, just the whole collection.
Well, I think your point about not hiding, that these are legitimate books, legitimate sources, legitimate things for people to read, and not hiding them. I think that is a really important piece of the story as well. So talk to me a little bit about why you believe, as a librarian, as a parent, as a person in the community, that a diversity of books, a diversity of stories, children being able to see themselves in stories, why is that important to have books that are representative on the shelves, of whether it's a public community library or whether it is a school library at any of the levels? Why is that important?
Yeah. There's a concept in librarianship, which is that collections should be both mirrors and windows. So you should be able to look at a library collection and see yourself in those stories to help you learn about yourself and your experience. And there are certain types of people that are more represented in library collections, generally people who are white, people who are of dominant religions, people who have, kind of a happy home life and happy marriage and all that. And it's nice to see yourself reflected there, or to encounter issues that happen in those types of, situations, groups, what have you. But I think it's also important to see, for people who are not of those types of groups, who are of more minority or marginalized populations, to also see themselves in a collection. So if you want a collection to be representative, even just to say we want it to be representative of our community, that inherently is going to create a diverse collection, because you have diversity in your in the human experience. So whether that's learning about loss or trauma or violence or, poverty and hunger, or, just being different in any kind of way. In order to make your collection a mirror of your community, you're going to have diversity. But I also think that it's really important for people to engage with stories that are unlike their own. So I love to travel, but I do not travel the world. I don't, stay in a place and learn about the lives of the people that live there, even when I am traveling. And a way for me to do that instead is through stories, or for me to learn about how it might feel for someone who's going through a traumatic time. I was just reading a book this weekend. I think it's called The Best We Could Do. And it was someone talking about, it starts off with her talking about the trauma of delivering her first child, which is not an experience that I had. Or learning about, the loss of a child, or the experience coming out to a family member who maybe is exceptionally accepting, but that's still a very stressful thing, or, deciding not to because of the danger to your situation if you do. So I just think that, and it's not all just about individual stories, it can also just be about ideas. So we all have our own individual spot on the, political spectrum. And it might be hard to engage with people and stressful to engage with people who don't have those same ideas that we do. But a way to learn more about their perspective is read an article, read a book, watch a video where you're not having to, be on and be right and try to preserve that relationship, but it allows you to engage with ideas that you might not agree with in a less stressful and kind of safer way. So it's kind of a long-winded way of saying it, but you should see yourself, but you should also be able to learn about others through your collections.
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective of both pieces of it, and how do we learn if we're not willing to look at other people's stories as well, but also having that personal experience of understanding a story because it comes from something that you have experienced. A few people have said to me in various conversations that I've had on this issue that the temperature is so hot right now politically on this issue and other issues. Wouldn't it be better for particularly school libraries, teachers, to just back down a little bit and not have those books on the shelves, not whether it's in a classroom or whether it's in a library, and just to calm things down a bit, just remove them and then let it calm down and then maybe come back at it. Is that a good idea?
Like I said earlier, it's okay to make decisions that protect your job and your livelihood and the continued funding or existence or support of your institution. But yeah, I would not encourage that. I've spoken to librarians who, even if they haven't dealt with a formal challenge or request for reconsideration, they recognize, and I've had this experience where even just knowing that there are people out there who are unhappy with you, it can have a real chilling effect on how you go about your collection development. And I think that if we believe that it is right for these materials to be included, then to kind of hedge that is a step in the wrong direction. And in the meantime, you have students or patrons who are very interested in these materials, and you're restricting their right to access that material through your collection, even temporarily. But yeah, it can be a hard decision to make. There are a lot of competing interests and ideas, but I would encourage folks to keep those materials in their collections while they can, and to continue to make collection development decisions as if there was not a challenge breathing down your neck, as difficult as that can be.
Yeah, and I really agree with you in all of that. We have some questions in the comment section, and David asks, does the association make any direct approaches to school boards that are considering censorship actions?
So we generally do not reach out to libraries directly without someone asking us to. So that could be a librarian, a library staff member, an administrator. It could be a community member. And when we hear about, so we have a reporting form on the Iowa Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee page, where folks can report any challenges or controversies that are happening in their communities or their institutions. And you don't have to tell us. One, it's opt-in. There's no requirement that anyone report anything to us. And you don't have to tell us where the challenge is happening. I just received a few more last week. I received 3 more book challenge reports that don't have any identifying information about the institution. You can also give that information to us, but also say, nope, we got this. We don't need your help. So for any of them that I have contact information, we will reach out to and either say, how can we help? Or we heard you don't need any help, but we're still here if that changes. We tend to work to support the library staff and how they are communicating with their board, with their community members, with their stakeholders. We do very, very rarely appear at meetings. Today being one of those days, actually. One member of our Intellectual Freedom Committee will be speaking at the Johnston Public School Board meeting tonight. And kind of in response to some of the calls by legislators that have happened there. And that was at the request of community members. So we have a small group of community members, I believe, and who are working with the district librarians and Intellectual Freedom Committee to go and make this special appearance there. But we don't just show up and kind of stick our noses in the business of what's going on in individual libraries or schools.
Yeah, and I have been following the Johnston conversation and had a community leader on this program last week to talk about all of the challenges that are happening, not just book challenges, but things happening in Johnston. And so glad that you will, that your association will be adding their voice to that conversation tonight. In the comment section, Amanda asked, what are some differences between public and school libraries when it comes to mission scope reflecting the community?
Oh, that's a tough question. I am a public librarian. I worked in public libraries for, 8 years before I went to get my master's degree, and then, knew I was going to stay a public librarian. So I didn't do a lot in school libraries. I think that I'm not sure that I would make such a huge difference between public schools and public libraries as I might distinguish between public schools and private schools, or public libraries and private libraries, which do exist. Often they're kind of content specific, so maybe a medical library or a law library or something like that, or a corporate library. But I think that I would like them to be as close as possible. I think that in public schools as well as in public libraries, you have a duty to serve everyone in your community and to support the needs and the interests of everyone in your community. In terms of school versus public libraries, often, the collections are more narrow in terms of like reading ability and skill and appropriateness for, the population. So as a public library, we serve 0 to 110. We serve anyone who walks through our doors. We've got board books with little baby teeth marks on it. We've got large print Westerns. We've got, cookbooks. We've got everything, hopefully everything anyone could need. And if we don't have it, we can find it. Whereas school libraries have a much smaller audience to consider. So they're, elementary schools will have a much larger proportion of picture books. and chapter books. Their reference collections will look different. But I think that both, that all libraries have a responsibility to reflect their collection or reflect their community in their collection and all of their diverse interests. Whether people agree with that or not. There's have been a court case I've been referencing a lot lately is Island Tree School District versus Pico, which I believe was in the 50s or 60s. I don't know. Maybe someone can. I don't know if Connie's familiar with it, but it was a Supreme Court case where some school administrators had removed books from the school library because they disagreed with the content of those materials, and the Supreme Court found that that was not a legitimate way to make your collection development policies. So students and minors are individuals with First Amendment rights, just like adults are. And adults, parents, guardians, whoever's responsible for those children, they have a right and responsibility to guide their child's or that minor's use of the library. But it's not up to the library to enforce those restrictions on those students or minors. Again, kind of long-winded, maybe a little off topic, but
you're good. Is there a reason, so you're part of the Dubuque, I wrote this down, Dubuque County Library District.
Yeah.
Is there, if somebody brings a challenge, is there a legitimate reason why a book would be removed? And you talked about policy before, so following policy, but
yeah,
as a librarian, is there legitimacy in removing books from the shelves of a library?
Yeah, I can think of a couple of reasons why materials might be challenged, might have somehow made their way into the collection, whether it was, I don't know, I'm thinking of the word intentional, but intentional is not the word that I mean. Anyway.
Purposeful or?
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, I'll just move on. So it's altogether possible that the scope of a library changes. So as your population changes, it might be that your collection development policies change. One of the things that we do not collect is textbooks. We also don't. So, if for some reason there was something in the collection that was a textbook, or which that's kind of a weird example, if some information was out of date, and I would say not just out of date, like it still lists Pluto as one of the planets kind of things, but potentially dangerous information. So like there's a medical book on the shelves that has a lot of really out of date or debunked information, and you have in your policy that accuracy and keeping information up to date is really important. And someone brings this to you and challenges it. I mean, hopefully it would just get to a complaint where someone would point this out to your library staff and they would say, oh my goodness, you're right, we should withdraw this. And that would be part of the regular withdrawal process. So if something is out of date or inaccurate, that's one way that could happen. Also, I know that there's a librarian that I have spoken to who they intended to purchase like the R-rated version of a movie, but instead got like the unrated version of of a movie, and just didn't notice as it was being cataloged. We often, when we're ordering, just like on Amazon, but often there are a lot of different versions of the same title in different formats. And so sometimes you just click on the wrong one and you get a format you didn't intend to. And, so they had someone return that. And I don't remember if the patron made a complaint about it or even just a comment about it, but they looked at it and said, oh my goodness, we did not intend for this to be a part of the collection. And so they withdrew it. But those are kind of less about someone having a personal disagreement with the content of an item and more just about, did this fit our collection development policy? Does it still fit our collection development policy? even in terms of accuracy or timeliness or things like that. So yes, there are times where materials will be, brought up by a patron and will be removed from the collection, but it's a little different.
So with the current challenges and attempts to ban specific books, and we said at the top of the show, a lot around issues related to race, racism, a lot of them around LGBTQ stories. And we mentioned Johnston as well. And there was a statement that came out today. One of the books that is often mentioned in challenges is The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, written by Sherman Alexie. And he actually put a statement out today that referenced Johnston and the parents and the students that are fighting against these challenges. And I want to read part of his statement. I believe in the intelligence, imagination, and maturity of young adults. I believe they are fully able to grapple with difficult ideas and situations with grace, humor, wisdom, and courage. There have been more and more efforts, mostly by conservatives, but also by some liberals, to censor the potentially difficult ideas in books that are studied in classrooms and shelved in libraries. This is morally, intellectually, and culturally wrong. And so back to this question of why this is happening and why there seems to be an uptick in these challenges. A lot of it does seem to be driven by politics, and certainly religion is a piece of that behind that politics of defining for other people what is appropriate and what is not appropriate for our young people, our youth, and our children. And is that kind of your take on it, of this political motivation behind a lot of these challenges that we're seeing in districts across the state?
Yeah. I think that it's, hard conversations or difficult conversations are difficult to have. And I think that we all have things that, especially parents, we know that we should talk to our kids about, that we know we should be discussing and we should be teaching our kids about, but it can be really hard to find a time to bring those up, or to, to have those conversations, to push through those uncomfortable feelings. And I think that there's also this desire to insulate children and make sure that they don't feel uncomfortable. And I understand that impulse. We want our kids to be happy. We don't want them to, to feel bad about things that we don't think that they should feel bad about. But I think that there's a lot of empathy building that happens during those conversations. And I'm getting, again, a little away from your actual question, but
But books can help with those conversations too. If we take those stories away from kids, to your point earlier about windows, books can help. Reading those stories with your children can help in those conversations and to talk about the experience of other people.
I think it can be hard when parents feel blindsided by something. So whether it's, reading a picture book that features, a character with two moms, when that isn't something that your children know or understand yet. And then, thinking, we're just sitting here doing bedtime, and now I have to have this big conversation that I didn't want to have with my kids. When we feel surprised and get caught off guard, you can kind of, it just kind of stops you, and it can be uncomfortable. But, not everything, kids don't need as much of an explanation as we think they do. I think we tend to kind of overcompensate and really get into the weeds about things, when it really could just be, oh yeah, this person's, this character, they have two moms. That's something that some people have. Okay, we're going to keep reading, and if the kid wants to ask questions, they certainly can. If you want to get into it more, you certainly can. And you can even, as a parent, include your own personal and family values on that, whether it's, we believe that is totally normal and something, your aunt is married to a woman. It's just like that. Or it can be that's something some people do, but that's not something that our religion tells us is okay. And so we don't think that that's okay. Those are perfectly acceptable responses based on your family's beliefs.
And books really can be a tool for that conversation to happen. I want to ask one final question as we wrap things up. We have a lot of folks who believe in diversity and come from a viewpoint of values that believe that there should be a whole spectrum of books on the shelves for children to access and for folks to access in public libraries. And so they're concerned about these challenges to books and challenges to intellectual freedom. What would you give them in it as advice of how they can be engaged in the conversation and make a difference in their public school districts or in their public libraries?
I would say there are several things that you can do. One of them is to check out and read the books. If you see a display at a bookstore or your school library or your public library, make a comment to whoever's on the circulation desk and say, "Oh, I just found a really great book over on that display that you have for Pride Month, or about non-traditional family structures, or whatever it may be." Send an email to your local librarian if they feature a story in their story times that you really like. Send them an email. They will often pass that along to their boss, or they will keep that in their praise folder. And I would just say, kind of reinforce the inclusion of those items in the collection and in programs. Show up for programs, or even mention, even if you can't make it, make a comment to the programming librarian or someone saying, "Oh, I was really excited for this. I hope that you do something like this again." I would also say, if you can take 5 or 10 minutes and send an email to the governing body of your school or your public library, or even your city council, whoever the stakeholders are in your community, and just say, "Here are some reasons why I really appreciate the library, and I just want to make sure that that you all understand how much value that this brings to me and my family, and I think to our community." Those can be really powerful. If you have really high ambitions, volunteer for your library board or run for your library board, depending on how your governance structure works, or your city council or your school board, or any committees, or volunteer however you can. But really, just a comment, an email, sharing an appreciation post on social media. These are all good ways to support the library in your community. I know when I was facing a bunch of challenges in Orange City, there were a lot of social media comments, and especially on our social media page, from people who were not happy. And we took the approach of just not engaging. That was not the right forum for us to engage with. But it was really encouraging to see community members kind of step up and fight for us in the comments section. So if you have that, if you have that desire to fire off a few comments, and that's appreciated too.
Thank you. I appreciate your insight in all of that, and you come with a depth of experience in so many ways that I think that has been great to have you on the program today to talk about this issue. Thank you to everyone who joined us today on Facebook and YouTube, whether it was live or whether you're watching the recording. We appreciate you taking the time to listen into the conversation. Amanda, thank you so much for all of the work that you are doing, and good luck in these days ahead, because the challenges will not stop, I don't think, anytime soon, and we're going to continue to have these public conversations. I echo what Amanda said and encourage you to give some love back to your librarians and those on staff, whether it's the public library or the public school libraries. and they need your help and your support, and to be vocal on these issues. Of course, we are going into legislative time in the next month. Legislature starts January 10th, and we know that there are some legislators who have their targets on this issue, and particularly public schools. So you will hear more from us about that as well, and hope that you will be engaged in these conversations. And so for now, I also want to say, as I always say, please do register to vote. If you have already registered to vote, then we are grateful that you are, but help somebody else to register to vote. It is important in our democracy that everybody is involved. And for now, take care and stay safe, be well, and have a great week. Thank you, everyone.